Welcome to this series exploring innovation, progress, and achievement using a technocentric paradigm by Ash Stuart.
You may want to also read Ash's original Substack article for the best experience, including footnotes and other details.
Episode 31. The Phoenix Principle. Schumpeterian Renewal. Part 2. The varied forms of renewal after the varied forms of collapse. In the previous episode, episode 30, we looked at the fall of Rome, or rather the many falls of Rome, or even whether Rome fell at all. You might have noticed that episode 30 is what I'm calling a milestone article, just as episode 20 was. Both represent a certain curtain closing, an end of an era, if you like, one of the Bronze Age, and the other of the Iron Age or the Classical era in some sense. But there are some key differences between the two. For, in our study of human innovation and progress, we are at a key juncture, juxtaposing these two great technological epochs to see how they compare on these counts. Let's get to it. Our journey into the Bronze Age started in episode 12, and in the course of those 9 episodes, I trust I demonstrated innovation and growth from our technocentric perspective, culminating in that somewhat sudden and surely drastic Bronze Age collapse. In the next 10 pieces following that was our journey into a rather different era, but I think we got to cover many more developments we can still recognize in the modern day. For unlike a great many achievements of the Bronze Age, innovations in the latter period did not just vanish into thin air. Our juncture here in this story gives us an opportunity to once more take a systems view, an overarching perspective of each of the time periods, and draw our conclusions. Post mortem Rome. My discussion of the fall of Rome in the previous episode might have seemed a bit annoying to some people. As I touched upon in episode 21, another renewal piece as this one, we are used to dividing up history into neat sections, clearly defined. As though one fine day, Brian woke up, stretched his arms and said, "Right, yesterday the Bronze Age collapse happened, and today is the beginning of the Iron Age. Let's go meet Irene and Iris." Things are never so neatly boxable as that. Reality is always messier, and that's what I hope I demonstrated with some of my semi-counterfactual juggling in the previous episode. Even the Bronze Age collapse, or the transition from that era to what we call the Iron Age, was not so clear-cut as we think, but as things get more complex, the blur gets even blurrier. Drawing the line. Even though we discussed the so-called fall of Rome, the more important underlying question was, what is Rome anyways? This matters to us in this pursuit because just as with chronology, there's also a blurring of boundaries and definitions, and in any formal study, we have to perforce draw the line somewhere, even literally, when sketching our box diagrams to model and explain phenomena. This is probably much easier when we are building modern technological systems, be they mechanical, or these days, primarily digital. But it's harder to do this when looking at other aspects of reality, which is why, in my technocentric view, I intend to make the best of both worlds by using technological rigor in what are traditionally questions of the humanities. I mean, consider this. Scholars have debated for a long time, and still continue to, on the question of what was the Roman Empire. I was only adding my 2 denarii on that topic. All this said, we can still think of the point in question as a system, or we just have to. A combination of institutions that gave it a certain character, a unique one even. As with any complex system, it evolved. The combination of the institutions varied, and even the makeup of those institutions evolved, including going extinct, as we saw with the fall of the Republic, replaced by the imperial system. Furthermore, it helps to look at the legacy Rome left, and this is where the contrast between the classical era and the previous Bronze Age starts to come into view rather starkly, and thus give us juicy nuggets in our intellectual pursuit here. Disclaimer: there are similar trends in other parts of the globe, with often significant differences as well, but right here my focus is on this one case for practical reasons. The lingering legacy. As I've said, even after the year 476 AD, the traditional date given to the fall of Rome in the West, people continued to see themselves as Romans or Latins. And we've seen that in the East, the Byzantines did so too, expressing that identity and that term in Greek. And we even saw how that Romanness was extended further afield, from Constantinople to Moscow, in the name and claim of the Romanovs, Tsars of the Russian Empire, what they called the Third Rome. Forms of the word Rome lives on in several ways. Consider the word romance, originally a story told in the Roman way. The idea of Rome itself persisted. The Germanic Franks under Charlemagne set up, with the blessing of Pope Leo II, what's been called the Holy Roman Empire. As many have pointed out, though, it was neither holy, nor Roman, nor empire. Rome had become a resellable brand, a franchise under the Franks no less, eh? The cognomen of that famous Roman, Gaius Julius. Despite the brutal attempt, or should I say, the preservers of the old order took a stab at stopping him from destroying the Republic, outlived the Republic to become synonymous with emperor, right into the 1900s. Yes, again, in the title of Wilhelm II, Kaiser, and the same with his cousin, who we in passing met last time, Nicholas II, Tsar. Strangely, though, you say, their other imperial cousin, George V of Britain, didn't have such Caesarian pretensions. But Rome's legacy is more fundamental than a few such trivia. By the way, the word trivia comes about because in Rome, where three roads intersected, folk would discuss commonplace matters. Now, how's that for some trivia? A lot has been written and said about what the Romans have done for us, not least in that erudite and educative series, Monty Python. But consider this: every single non-Roman. Sorry, I won't use the word barbarian, a derogatory term coined by the enlightened Greeks to denote and denounce foreigners. Every single non-Roman invader into Western Roman territory went native, adopted Roman customs, language, and Roman Catholic religion. Think of all those Germanic tribes that made their way south and took charge, gung-ho with gusto. Where did they go? No, really. Where are the Lombards, the Normans, even the Franks? Yes, they left their mark on certain places, like Lombardy, Normandy, and France. But didn't they themselves disappear into the attenuant but still extant fabric of late Romanity? Latin lessons. So what lessons does all this have for us? When we discuss the great Bronze Age civilizations, we spoke about, again, empires, CEO emperors, and palace economies. And with Rome, we're doing something similar. Such centralized systems of governance as these did offer some advantages for progress. A common currency, a top-down legal system, and laws enforced across a vast space, border-free travel, and so on. But at what human cost? Was it worth the hassle? The sheer political instability, the constant threat of invasion, mirrored in the other direction by the constant desire for further territorial expansion. In the words of economist historian Walter Scheidel, the fall of Rome, and it not coming back in a similar form again was the best thing that happened to Europe.
An interlude or an interlap?
After the decline of Roman political power in the West, many of the artifactual and institutional innovations also declined. They perhaps took an inferior form. A few disappeared altogether. But just as we discussed 10 episodes ago, the spark did not disappear. Sure, it took a few centuries, and there were more convulsions along the way, but slowly and surely, things started to recover. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a straight line, but then it never is. In the following 9 episodes, we shall explore some of the lesser-known aspects in that intervening period and see how they shaped human innovation and progress, if not right away, eventually. And in doing so, we shall explore the merit in Scheidel's bold claim. The innovations of the classical era, both artifactual and institutional, were larger and more long-lasting than that of the Bronze Age, and that's why we use the term classical to denote them. They set a certain standard, a yardstick for later generations to aspire to emulate, to compare themselves against. In this process, however, are we learning the good things from them? Or are we also repeating the mistakes they made? Later generations and eras, including our own, have had such a classical past to base themselves on. Have they made the best of it? Join me as we prepare to enter an exciting new phase in our journey.